All right, guys, welcome. We're just about to get started. I think there's a few more people joining us into the call. I just want to make sure that everybody comes in so we don't have this admit screen popping up. Thank you for joining the PwC webinar about customer-centric and autonomous supply chains. My name is Henrik Olsen, and I lead our consulting operations practice in Sweden. With me today, I have two esteemed colleagues, Michael Nadelman, a supply chain and digital operations specialist, as well as Mayank Abrol, a specialist in logistics and connected supply chains. Next slide, please. We'll be spending about the next 45 minutes together covering three main sections. First, we will go through the background and approach of this year's study. Second, we will explore the details of the study and add some flavor with a few client examples and a summary. Third, we'll wrap up with a 10 to 15 minute Q&A when we will open up for questions. Next slide, please. I knew that in the invite it said that we were going to spend about 60 minutes together. Let's see if we want to use all of that time or if we can wrap up early at about 8:45. In order for things to operate as smoothly as possible, we would ask you to please post your questions on Slido during the presentation, and then these will be addressed in the Q&A. There's two alternatives for you to do this. One, you can log into the www.slido.com webpage in your browser and type in the code #Q948. Or alternative two, you can just point your camera of your phone to the screen and scan the QR code down on the left-hand side, and that should hopefully take you to the slido.com site. Please note that the session is being recorded, and we kindly ask you to mute your microphones during the presentation. All right, without further ado, let's get into the juicy parts of the presentation. Next page, please. So over the last couple of years, PwC has published a range of studies around various areas of the supply chain. The last two focusing on digital champions, and the one to the very, very right is the one that we're going to focus on today. Later, and both of these have focused on an emerging trend and a capacity that we call digital champions. Later this year, we will also release a digital procurement survey, and so stay tuned for some more information around that. If we go to the next page, in this year's global study, we take a look at how digital champions have achieved supply chain excellence. And we explore four key questions and themes. What are the key characteristics of a next level supply chain and which capabilities are required to achieve it? In which technologies are digital champions investing, and what does a state-of-the-art supply chain technology stack look like? Which benefits and performance improvements can be realized through investing in supply chain excellence? And what are some of the key implications on the supply chain organization in terms of upskilling and new ways of working? Next page, please. For the study, globally, we interviewed more than 1,600 companies spanning 33 countries, spread pretty evenly amongst 7 key industries that you can see that below. Out of the 1,600 companies, close to 190 were Nordics-based, which also meant that for this year, we could create a unique Nordic cut of our study and really explore what makes the Nordic population of companies stand out or differentiate in a global context. Next page, please. Using our research, we were able to map out and assess the company's supply chain and establish a digital maturity score that allowed us to classify companies into 4 key categories that you will hear mentioned throughout the presentation. Champions, only about 9% of them globally. Innovators, followers, and novices. Next page, please. And in order to really create some more depth into our study, we complemented our research by a number of in-depth interviews. I believe it was close to 170 or even up to 200 with leading companies around the globe that are seen as leaders in their industry and leaders in supply chain, or that have worked on some best practice use cases that we've seen in the media. And we will come back to 2 of those, IKEA and Continental, later on in the presentation and hear what they had to say about this. Michael, why don't you help us dive into the study and some of the results?
Yeah, thank you, Henrik. So if you move to the next slide, please, then we will talk about 8 areas that are important. First of all, the vision. The tomorrow's supply chains, they will be connected and self-orchestrated. And we see this group of companies, the digital champions, they've already come a long way in realizing this vision. And then other companies still struggle with getting momentum. And again, this study is meant to provide guidance to the companies that are struggling to see where they should focus. Then we'll talk about the benefits. These benefits are now real. For some years, there's been this movement around Industry 4.0, and the benefits have been, I would say, lacking a little bit. But now we really see that digital champions, they show higher growth and lower supply chain costs compared to the rest. And then we'll talk about 4 competence areas that are critical to implementing the vision. And these are supply chain transparency, integrated planning, smart logistic flows, and then dynamic supply chain segmentation. We'll talk about artificial intelligence as one of the key areas where digital champions are investing heavily to accelerate performance of their supply chains. And then at the end, we'll talk about how do they reach this level of maturity? How can they actually, or what have been the key parameters for succeeding in transforming their organization? Next slide, please. So let's start by looking at the vision. So tomorrow's supply chains, they will be connected and self-orchestrated ecosystems. And what does this mean? Well, it means that suppliers, customers, manufacturers, and logistic providers, they're seamlessly connected in real time to provide fast, tailored, and efficient product and service deliveries. Digital champions, they clearly see the focus shifting towards becoming an integrator, focusing on the end-to-end orchestration rather than a more narrow focus or traditional focus on value creation within specific supply chain areas. Next, please. And the survey shows a clear difference in focus between the digital champions and the rest of the companies surveyed. If you look at the digital champions, they predominantly focus on external integration that extends beyond company walls. And they include, as I said, suppliers and customers networks. In contrast, we still see that more than 2/3 of the remaining companies, they focus primarily on internal integration as a means of achieving efficiency gains. And of course, these gains come from the digital supply chain investments, but they're still focusing primarily on internal integration and internal benefits. Next, please. The benefits, the investments into advanced supply chain capabilities, they clearly pay off. The study shows that digital champions, they're able to achieve higher revenues from new business models and better customer service, and they can do this at a lower cost. We also see that Nordic-based companies are falling behind on both revenue generation and efficiency improvements, which is worrying, and I think this is a real call for action. The advanced supply chain capabilities clearly improve supply chain performance. We see inventory turns improving, as well as service levels towards customers, such as on-time delivery. It's no longer a question of choosing between one or the other, either improving performance or improving your efficiency. Now we see digital champions, they are able to improve both the customer performance and do this at a lower cost and with better use of their invested capital. And I think this is a good sign for many companies and inspiration for moving in this direction. However, to achieve such performance, companies need to invest. And the study shows that digital champions, they invest twice as much in building these capabilities than the digital novices. And Nordic-based companies, they are unfortunately investing less than the rest of the world. We see a clear connection between the willingness to invest and the benefits you achieve as a company, both on growth and efficiency. Given this, let's now look into the capabilities that digital champions have built to reach their leading position. And again, there are 4 of these capabilities. Supply chain transparency, knowing what's going on at every step in the supply chain, all the way from suppliers to customers. Integrated planning and execution, making sure every step is connected from forecast to daily execution. Then the smart logistic flows, managing inbound, outbound transportation with warehousing to secure fast and reliable fulfillment. And then last, dynamic supply chain segmentation, tailoring the supply chain to fulfill different customer demands and making this reconfigurable to respond to changing demands. Let's look at the first one. Next slide, please. Supply chain transparency. It makes possible to track what's happening across the supply chain, and it also makes it possible to act faster if something goes wrong. Supply chain transparency is also an enabler for a number of areas that are important to most companies. First, it makes it possible to proactively inform customers and partners when deliveries can be expected. It provides traceability and chain of custody, and this helps you in your sustainability efforts. So you know where's the origin of your products, of your ingredients, of your components, and you can track where it's coming from and make sure that it comes from the right sources. It gives visibility into inventories and capacity that enables you to find alternative ways of serving customers, and it also brings visibility on your costs. And of course, this is an enabler for optimizing your supply chain performance and your cost. More than half of the digital champions, they consider supply chain visibility one of their top priorities, and more than 60% have implemented this already. In contrast, only 1 out of 4 Nordic companies have implemented this capability, despite the fact that this is one of the most important of the 4 key differentiators, and very often the first one that companies embedding on this journey they start on. The need for more responsive and integrated operations is driven by volatile markets conditions, increasing competition, and of course the need to reduce cost. Advanced planning approaches has proven to be the effective building block in achieving this. And what do we mean by then advanced planning? Well, advanced planning is of course aligning your planning across multiple planning areas, from product portfolio planning to capacity, materials, inventory, and logistics, but also linking this to sales and marketing planning and more accurate demand sensing, but then integrating these different planning horizons from operational and tactical to strategic planning, linking plans with execution, and more importantly, connecting all this with your financial planning. So instead of having planning segmented into different areas that are treated separately, we now see that it's all integrated in one planning system, one planning infrastructure, and it's all connected in real time. Digital champions, they're well ahead in this field. 72% of companies having partially fully implemented this capability. And this is only true for 8% of the Nordic-based companies we interviewed. And I think this reflects clearly in the responses we also hear companies struggling with volume flexibility and adapting fast enough to changing market conditions. Smart logistics, managing and executing the physical flow of goods from the point of origin to the point of consumption is an essential part of any supply chain. And smart logistics builds on supply chain transparency and also integrated planning to connect suppliers, manufacturers, carriers, and customers interactively. And it's a key savings driver and a growth driver in the connected supply chain ecosystem. This capability alone accounts for more than 50% of the reported overall supply chain cost savings that we hear reported by the digital champions. So smart logistics can only be implemented if you have already the transparency and the integrated planning, but that's where the biggest saving is coming from. Implementing smart logistics, I think, is a non-negotiable move. This is something companies have to do, and more than 80% of digital champions have implemented this already. For Nordic-based companies, less than 1 in 4 companies have this implemented, possibly because the investments are substantial, and of course then easier to justify for larger companies. And there are a lot of smaller, medium-sized companies within the Nordic population. But again, this is an area that companies need to focus on if they want to achieve the benefits that we saw early on. The fourth capability, dynamic supply chain segmentation. This is the design and operation of distinctly different end-to-end value chains for different customer segments, depending on the needs. This is not new. Many companies have already implemented supply chain segmentation based on a static definition of customer segments. But digital champions, they've taken this one step further. They've built the capabilities to dynamically reconfigure their supply chains to flexibly adapt to changing customer and business requirements. So again, having the same overall focus, but also taking into account that we see a lot of changes in the markets and changes in customer needs, and therefore being able to adapt to those changes almost instantaneously. The survey shows that more than half of the digital champions consider this a top priority, and 3 out of 4 have implemented this already. In comparison, we only see 1 in 3 of the Nordic-based companies have segmented their supply chains, and most of these are not capable of being reconfigured dynamically. So again, if you want to focus on the growth areas coming out of the transformation of your digital supply chains, then this is an area where we see this is driving growth most importantly. So to summarize those 4 capabilities, the digital champions, they've come a long way in all 4 areas. And we also see, unfortunately, Nordic companies need to invest more in all 4 areas in order to move ahead. We see a lot of pilot projects taking place, but the difficulty very often is taking pilot projects and implementing them into the supply chain for real operations. So let's look at the technology of that is mastered now by the digital champions, and then what they do in order to make this actually work. So supply chain ecosystems, when implemented, they're generating vast quantities of data. And of course, significant benefits come from taking advantage of these diverse data and share them with supply chain partners. 70% of all companies already use advanced analytics in at least one of the areas within the supply chain. But digital champions, they have deployed artificial intelligence 2 to 3 times more widely than the average companies. The key areas where we see artificial intelligence being used, they are within the supply chain transparency area, cost to serve optimization, also in the supply chain segmentation to better understand consumer behaviors, and then the end-to-end planning, especially the demand sensing, and lastly, smart logistics. Then last, let's look at how do we master the transformation. Mastering transformation journey is not easy. We have found that digital champions, they have succeeded mainly due to 4 key focus areas that I'll go through now. First one, setting up cross-functional teams located in supply chain centers of excellence. And these centers of excellence are then used to drive forward, building up capabilities and continually deploying new tools and approaches in the organization. Secondly, establishing a learning organization with focus on continuously improving skills. Managing this transformation is not only a technology journey, but it's just as much an understanding of how this technology can be made used for in the organization. And upskilling the workforce is important. So training your existing employees, but then also attracting new digital talent is key. Then, of course, since this is a digital transformation, then technology is a key component. So upgrading the technology backbone is a must. And here we see that this is one of the more important drivers. But it's not just the technology, it's also bringing together business processes with IT and making sure that the IT systems are embedded in the ways of working. And we also see that digital champions, when implementing this, they make extensive use of external partners, both technology companies and other companies who are specialized in making this transformation happen and driving the supply chain innovation. So to summarize on the next slide, please, there are many priorities for digital champions, but if you look at the top 3 ones, then embedding advanced analytics into the supply chain is the key one. So when transforming your supply chain, digitizing your supply chain, you have vast amounts of data, and further developing how you use this data is the key priority for the digital champions now. The next one is to make sure that you have cross-functional collaboration taking place. We see that the key force of driving the change has been the centers of excellence, but the big challenge now is to make sure that it's not stuck in centers of excellence, but that you deploy this across the organization to make a real transformation of the culture. And the third part is this is really driven by talent who can make things happen, and attracting digital talent is a key. So again, the overall challenge when you have come this far is to understand how you move from a project-driven, center of excellence-driven transformation into making this a cultural change in your organization, to embed your new technologies in a digital culture, and to enable continuous improvement and learning. I hope this was a quick but comprehensive walkthrough of the background, the results from the survey, and the key points that you need to consider going forward. And then I will hand back to Henrik to talk about 2 of the companies that we have worked with and we've interviewed, and that gives you insights about practical implementations. Henrik, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Exciting stuff. I think that was a massive overview to take in at 08:25 in the morning. I really hope that you've gotten some strong coffee into your veins. I'm on my 2nd espresso already. But thank you so much, Michael. I think there's some really interesting insights there that I really encourage our audience to delve into, especially around some of the core components that Michael talked about around the Nordic companies. We really think that there is leeway to be made in order to up the investments. And I think the 2 examples that we're going to talk about today will shed some light on at least some of the thoughts around the core capabilities, the priorities that these companies have gotten right. I think they're both on a journey that they've started, that they're committed, and I think that they're starting to make some of the right moves, in the direction towards the digital champions. So apart from being, the pioneers of the flat pack, and also being, almost infamous for their very strong cost-cutting culture and almost cult-like, founding figure Ingvar Kamprad, IKEA, of course, hasn't gone unscathed through the recent moves and the new normal, where they become increasingly global. They've been increasingly setting up a global supply chain with warehouses and stores all over the world. And they've had to take into account a rapidly changing customer behavior. Not only now with COVID, of course, which has really kind of put, the storefront kind of model, retail model to its, really to its extreme, where all the pure plays, Amazon moving in, and Amazon recently moving into Sweden. So of course, IKEA's value chain and their value proposition has been challenged. Only being a flat pack, of course, is not the way to compete and win anymore. And IKEA realized this and started this journey, a couple of years back, and it's really been at the core of what they've been doing for several years, right? So they realized that some of the existing solutions that they had weren't enough, and they really brought innovation and sustainability into the core of its supply chain operations. So just to give you one example of what they've done really well, and it alludes to Michael's point around global collaboration across supply chains, reaching out into your ecosystem and leveraging it to fail fast and try new ideas. So what IKEA has done is that they've created something they call DMs, or development networks. These are global cross-functional teams of experts across their supply chain. So they are really people that sit globally, but also locally, and they're experts in their fields. And the network, they're really focused around 6 key prioritized development areas that set the innovation priorities for IKEA across the board. And they cover the end-to-end supply chain, from production, logistics, and packaging through to fulfillment of services. You can almost call them like, I don't know, maybe agile teams, but I think that's not really maybe setting the full tone. They're really development networks. And these networks have allowed IKEA to very quickly identify and share knowledge and insight across the organization around these new customer behaviors. They've also allowed them to change rapidly, coming back to Michael's points around these dynamic and integrated supply chains, where you can do integrated planning very efficiently. So by taking this network approach, IKEA can not only foster new ideas very quickly, but they can also ensure that they're implemented effectively. So they can take best practices and share it across the board in their network much faster than we see some other competitors. One such innovation is robot picking of heavy products. And this is really to better support the ergonomics for employees and customers, which has been a problem in the past. This is an innovation that they stood up very rapidly and that they're rolling out across the board now in various warehouses. Another way that the network is being leveraged is really to explore how to decarbonize transportation, or even to eliminate it entirely. What the IKEA has done is that they partnered with the Port of Rotterdam in an initiative called the Good Shipping Program, but of course it's also global, to pilot the use of biofuels on container ships. We also have been told, and we've seen, like many other players, is that they've been experimenting with 3D printing. How can you print raw materials, and how can you install mini IKEAs, maybe in rural areas in Africa, etc., to bring some of the basic IKEA furniture to the mass markets. So all in all, I think IKEA is a good example of how you get your network, both your internal but also external, and reaching out into the ecosystem to work and orchestrate that to truly embrace the spirit of a digital champion. Moving on, another interesting player is Continental. And as you all know, the automotive industry, similar to the retail industry that IKEA is exposed to, is going through rapid changes, right? There's a lot of stuff going on, not only with the electrification of the automotive industry, but also we're going through a shift in terms of new platforms, new cars being launched. This means that Continental need to step up their game in order to be relevant, not only for cars, but also for industry transportation through lorries, etc. And what they recently did was that they developed its Fast Forward 2030 vision. This vision is driving Continental's digital transformation of the supply chain into an autonomous supply network, very similar to those 4 core capabilities that Michael talked about. By 2030, Continental aims to connect all of their system, all of their data, and have it stored in the cloud. Right, and they want to make sure that the information can be shared real time with all relevant users across their global supply chain. So really what they've done is taken the extreme where we talk about Industry 4.0, and sometimes you hear the word control towers. They're doing it. And to give you two examples of how this works, in the Regensburg plant in Germany, they've deployed more than 7,000 sensors to help drive touchless material flows. So they use geolocation technology with a precision of about 5 centimeters. 5 centimeters, right? That's the sensitivity of the material flows that they're operating at. The use of geofencing and geolocation analysis ensures they can seamlessly track their assets, and they can also locate them in real time. Coupling this information with manufacturing and supply network planning has not only resulted in more accuracy in their planning, but it's also given them the ability to predict deviations and communicate them across the supply network much, much faster, leading to significant cost savings across the entire supply chain. Also, of course, cutting lead time, and also having the ability to proactively communicate with the customers if there is a disruption to their supply chain. This has not only been very relevant now with COVID, when we saw some of the supply network and the delivery times increased due to China, etc., going offline, off the grid for a few months. So it's really, really helped them. Secondly, they have begun developing a digital twin of their entire supply chain, using cloud solution to simulate material flows, but also leveraging intelligent algorithms that enable the company to quickly and proactively identify, again, whether some of these material supply failures could cause bottlenecks across the entire supply chain. So it's almost like a nervous system that they have, where they can see where things are, where there's a potential for challenge or a risk or an issue popping up. They can see it more or less instantaneously. As a result, countermeasures such as redistribution of stocks or inventory, or even production programs can be taken quickly, and customer delivery disruption can be avoided and communicated very clearly, which has also led to the point that Michael was making earlier. They're really making this OTIF and inventory, very complex equation, work, and they're communicating clearly. So although that they've had supply disruption and delivery disruption, they've ended up with more satisfied customers because they are so transparent. So really the case to point around the smart tracing and the smart logistics that Michael talked about. So let's move to the next page. So how do you get this journey started, and what are some of the 6 key elements that we see that you need to consider? Well, COVID and the virus that is now on its second wave, of course, hasn't slowed down the pace. We see that the new normal, of course, COVID is part of that, but we also see these rapidly changing consumer behaviors, right? So we can't wait. Digital champions are already ahead of the game. They've already acted, which means that if you haven't, you need to act now. What we see, and I think this is fascinating throughout the years of our studies that we've done, is that the players that started investing in early 2010 or even earlier, that they've had this investment pace, it is really starting to pay off now. We're seeing that the shift or the drift between the novices and the champions, it's really being separated. And we also see that it clearly boosts top line and bottom line growth. To Michael's point earlier, digital awareness is key, right? We need to upskill our workforce. We need to be curious. We need to study and be part of what's going on in the media. But I think also we need to be very open about seeking advice. Be inspired by these digital champions. Seek them out. But I think it's important that, as always, you need to create something that's your own, something that's true to your culture, your organization, and your customer needs. I think another piece of advice that we've seen is that these guys have been very persistent in closing the gap to become a digital champion. It takes time, and it often you fail, and you have to be persistent in that failure, not to not to be. It just takes time, right? So be persistent, work iteratively, learn, and then be relentless in your focus on both the overall kind of what the customer demands from you, even if the customer is internal or if it's external. So really be persistent, because the investment will pay off. And then finally, partner up. So just like the case of IKEA, partner up with people in your ecosystem, seek them out. Here in Stockholm, we have a vibrant ecosystem of these hubs. Norquen being one. Business Sweden has set up several partnerships. Seek them out so that you can learn from young companies, whether it's based around blockchain technology, AI technology. I think it's really key that you draw inspiration, and that you can that you leverage what they see, and that you see how that fit into your model. So really partnering up is a core capability and a key strength of some of these digital champions. With that, why don't I hand over to you, Mayank, and see if there's any questions from our audience. I think we have about 8 or 10 minutes that we can go through some of the questions.
Perfect, Henrik. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing the insights about the specific 2 client examples and then summarizing them as well. Let's see, looking at the questions, we have got some questions from the audience on the Slido. Let's take them one by one, depending on the time we have. And then if we have some time and we have some traction from the audience members, then let's open up for open questions from the audience. You guys can please unmute yourself and ask questions. But before that, let's talk about the questions we received on Slido. So the first one, I think, Henrik, you have already tried to cover it in the previous slide, and even Michael has been talking about it. So let me just phrase it out. So the question goes like this. Out of the 4 key areas you described, where do you get started with the transformation journey towards digital championship? I think a very good question to ask. So either of you, maybe Michael, if you want to address that.
Yeah, I would say the transparency part is where most companies see most benefits from the starting point. If you have a very scattered IT landscape with disconnected systems, which many companies have, then having transparency across these systems by using technology that connects these in a control tower thinking, that would be a very good starting point. But because at least it gives you transparency, it gives you a view of what is happening in different systems, even if they're not totally connected. And then you can start working on improving the footprint and integrating systems to look more into the transactional parts and the planning side as the next step. I think besides that, the cultural part that Henrik mentioned is also key. So depending on where you are on your journey, so if you have started already and you've created these centers of excellence, then of course that's a good thing. But upskilling your workforce is really key in that area as well.
And Michael, of course, we wouldn't be good consultants if we wouldn't kind of slightly disagree. So if I could kind of start my digital journey, I will actually start with an inventory of my talent. I would start with the people first, and then move into technology. But I think, as Michael said, it's really depending on where you are as a company. But I think talent is such a core component, and I think it's been, now that we're almost all working virtually. If you don't have that component, it makes all the tech, all the analytics, all the data that you can throw at it. It's such a vital component of getting that autonomous, people-led kind of transformation in place.
Brilliant. Moving on to the second one, then. I believe it's also related to the first one, but let's take a look at it. So how soon do we get a return on investment or benefit realization with this journey? I see Michael smiling, so let's give it to Michael again.
I think you have to be patient. I mean, this doesn't come quick. This is a massive transformation, and we've seen companies, as you mentioned earlier, starting 10 years ago, and now they're really reaping the benefits. So this is a long-term journey that you're in for. So be aware of that. But I mean, not saying that there will be no benefit coming earlier, but the big benefits will come when things finally start to fall in place. So we're talking 3-5 years at least. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Rome was not built in a day.
Certainly not. And not a city to Rome either.
Good. Then this one is quite interesting. So the question goes like this. So how will you differentiate between a digital champion and a digital innovator? I think we had these nomenclatures. And what are the benefits of investing in the journey to move from an innovator towards the championship?
I mean, I think that's an interesting one. I think what Michael and I have seen, and when we also talk to our global colleagues, is that it's almost like these guys are not towards the kind of exponential end of the curve, but I would say that they reap much higher returns. Like it's almost not if not twice, it's very close to it. So really they're able to really leverage their scale, but also they get the additional push. I would say I think that's the big differentiator. So it's really about, it's almost like they're coming over the hill, and then there's a second kind of wave in terms of how much savings and benefits and that they can achieve.
Mm.
And I think if I should add to that, as I mentioned earlier, when you look at your logistics, integrated logistics, that's really where we see companies reporting that the largest benefit in financial terms of these investments. So you need to get to a certain maturity before you can really start executing your within partnerships and so on in logistics flows. So that would be where I think the real breakthrough, the hockey stick that Henrik is mentioning, is coming into play. And then of course it accelerates from there when you start using AI to really, as we call it, supercharge your supply chain. But that actually means really using all that information you're collecting to continuously optimizing your performance.
Perfect. With that said, let's see if anyone in the audience has a question for the experts here. And with that, I believe that when you guys were joining, either you have muted yourself or we took the liberty to mute you out. So if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and shoot. All right. I think we guys have either made a wonderful impact or no impact. I would rather go with the first one, that we have made a good impact. So with that said, we are bang on time. So we decided to finish 15 minutes before 9, and it's 8:44. So let's go to the second last slide. So really thankful to all of you to join this webinar and listen to us and listen to the experts from PwC Sweden on how the different companies in various industries should take or embark on the journey towards digital transformation and become digital champions in the world of supply chains. With that said, key contacts, if you have further questions, please reach out to us. Here are our email IDs and our phone numbers. You can always refer to the PwC Sweden webpage. Go to the operations tab and you will find all of us there. And you can also find more details about the study that we have done this year. So that's about that. And on that note, I would again like to thank all of you, especially Michael and Henrik, to take the opportunity to talk about what we have done so far in the study, and then all the participants and the audience of this call to take out the time and give your precious time and give us an opportunity to talk about what we have done so far.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Have a wonderful day.
You as well. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.